me talk about some of the differences that, again, I think everyone is probably maybe aware of. But under Niyazov, there was, of course, no heir apparent. He had a family, I mean, an orphan, of course, but his own wife and daughter were thought to have lived in Moscow for many years. The son was usually considered to be abroad, but never officially recognized or paraded. No intent to groom him, or at least obvious to outsiders, to groom his son to succeed him. So obviously a huge difference with Berdymukhamedow. And, it's funny, I was thinking about some of the other changes, and I remember when Niyazov went from being, quite white-haired to a startling black overnight, whereas Berdymukhamedow has gone the other way, sort of started going gray later in his life, which may be just the normal toll of age. But I'm wondering if there may not be some sort of lesson there that Turkmenistan, was going to say eternally youthful, because he didn't want to think of himself, leaving the stage. He was going to be in office until he died, which of course he was. Whereas as Berdymukhamedow started going great, maybe this was part of his plan, that he would start becoming more the elder statesman as the younger generation comes to the fore. Now, of course, the younger generation is quite apparently personified by his own son. Now, Allan can talk about his own experience with him when he was ambassador. When I was in Geneva serving as the ambassador at the Conference on Disarmament, I heard that Serdar, the son, was in town studying at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, a very highly regarded institution. So I asked my contacts there if they could arrange a meeting, and I got sort of a rebuff. But my sources there did say that he was a serious person, didn't appear to goof off, was affable. So anyhow, I did get some positive feedback. And then when I came back in 2014 to serve as chargé briefly to keep the seat warm for Allan in a way, I only saw him once officially, and that was as a backbencher in it was when he was doing the oil and gas ministry. But again, as is typical of Turkmen government things, there's usually only one speaker, and that's the person who's conducting it. So didn't say anything. But the hints were certainly there. I remember going to, I think it was Day of the Horse, and the diplomatic corps was summoned out to the Hippodrome. And so there was a special award for the youngest generation, and guess who got the national award for the most promising horseman of the younger generation, and that was the grandson. So that again brings me back to this big difference of the family dynasty. I used to often be asked, referred to Turkmenistan as North Korea. And I actually always rejected that comparison because, yes, of course, both very remote, highly centralized, not democratic systems. But one, I said, Turkmenistan never threatened its neighbors the way the Kims have. And I said, and also, there is no intent to create a family dynasty. But that was Niyazov. This is Berdymukhamedow. Now, when I mentioned earlier that one of the things that's been typical about Turkmenistan is that, you have a constitution, you have rules, but that obviously they can be overridden out of political necessity. And that was clearly the case during the transition, when I think the constitution stipulates that the acting president, i.e. that was Berdymukhamedow, cannot stand for president. Well, guess what? But it may be that one constitutional norm is being honored, and that is you can't run for president until you're 40. So when people also ask sort of, why now this transition? I mean, the obvious one is, of course, that Serdar is 40. People, of course, speculate about recent events in Kazakhstan and, Nazarbayev's sort of, legacy began, unraveling in a way. And so the president decides, let's get it set up now. Who knows? But let me perhaps stop now, although, again, talking about the transition, there certainly were some positive steps taken that we were, very happy, that is the US government, to recognize a lessening of, although this could be political expediency, the cult of personality around Niyazov. And then in particular, something that I appreciated was that some of the absolutely disastrous steps that have been taken by Niyazov in the educational field were reversed. When I think back about my conversation with Niyazov, I think education was right up there because, we'd have these fruitless arguments, and I'd say there's no better investment you can make than in your people, and that's education. And I remember one of the comebacks he said was, look, I've been through the educational system, and half of it was just learning all this, Marxist Leninist dogma and stuff. So, you really don't need all that much time. But anyhow, so yes, there were good steps taken, although, I think, most of them were probably in the first 6 months. And then, of course, we started to see a lot of the same behavior coming back in terms of, building his own cult of personality. But anyhow, maybe I will stop here, and then Allan and Sebastien and Aynabat can pick it up from here. So thank you. Oh.
Thank you very much for a concise introduction, especially on Niyazov's period, because I think that Niyazov, in many ways, set up the political culture that was followed up by the second president. And we can also somehow, not presume, but to some extent probably expect the continuity of that kind of political culture with the new president. Probably with some another content or some slightly new content, but the very core of the regime we can expect relatively the same, and within the mentalness set up by the first president. So that's I think the message that should come from this forum. The second speaker is Allan Mustard, also the ambassador to Turkmenistan, the younger one in service terms, served in Turkmenistan from January 2015 till June 2019. His foreign office career is merged also with a foreign agriculture service. He served the embassy, the agricultural sections of the U.S. embassies in different places like New Delhi, Mexico, but also Moscow, Vienna, and Istanbul. And of course, then he moved to Turkmenistan. Plus, currently he's a senior fellow of a Caspian Policy Center. So maybe if you want to add some more, of course, feel free to do it. And the stage is yours. You have also 10 minutes.
Well, I'm just going to add one note to my biography, and that is when I moved to the DC metro area in April of 1982 to take up my first job in Washington, DC. I lodged with Laura Kennedy and her husband, John Feeney, while I was apartment hunting. So Laura and I go back a long, long way. We met on the exhibit when I was an exhibit guide on the second half of Agriculture USA. Laura was on the first half, I was on the second half. And that was the period when I made my first trip to Central Asia too. I had 21 hours in Ashgabat before the KGB ran me out of town and sent me back to Moscow. So that whetted my appetite. I was very glad to come back in 2015. I want if his training to become president really began in 2008, a year after he was elected president. He was given 2 foreign out. He went to Moscow to study in the Diplomatic Academy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. And then following that, he went to Geneva, as Laura mentioned, to study security studies. This is unusual. Foreign study normally in Turkmenistan precludes government service. In other words, if you study in a foreign institute, you're able to get a job with the government. So for him to have studied in agricultural technology, in addition to that, he got another undergraduate degree and a postgraduate degree from foreign institutions. And that was an indicator that he was being groomed for something bigger. In 2013, and over the next 10 jobs, he did 4 months on the European desk, European Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, followed by 3 years at the State Agency for Hydrocarbons. That was the longest period he held one job, the 3 years at the State of Information, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 2 years in the Mejlis, the Turkmen parliament, representing one of the 9 months as deputy minister, for 6 months as the deputy governor of Ahal province, 7 months as the governor of Ahal province, 1 year as the minister of as the
Allan.
deputy prime minister. For concurrently with that, he was also on the Security Council. And yes,
I'm sorry, we have a problem of connection with you. So maybe could you turn off your camera? It might help because we lost a part of your presentation.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
What did you lose from me? What did you lose?
We hear you like time to time.
When did you stop
your
hearing?
voice is losing.
All right.
But basically, we understand the biography of Serdar Berdymukhamedow changing or shifting himself, or shifting by probably his father from one place to another, from one place, from one educational institution to another one, and the last job progress in his career, growing up in this way to kind of descendant of the new president, if I understand it correctly.
Well, right. I've just moved to someplace. Essentially, he then spent 5 months as deputy prime minister for innovation, while also serving on the Security Council and as chairman of the control chamber. And then most recently, 7 months to date as the deputy prime minister for economics and finance. He's also a commissioned officer in the military. He is currently with the rank of colonel. So on top of the 10 civilian jobs, he also has a military commission. Clearly, he was being groomed for succession. And there was obviously 10 jobs in 9 years. That's broad, but not very deep exposure to the executive and the legislative branches. I should also point out, if you look at the biographies of his opponents, the 8 candidates running against him for president, they're virtual unknowns. Clearly, the deck has been stacked. He turned 40 last September, which made him eligible to run for president. And that is what I think really triggered the decision to have him run for president. If you look at the platform as presented yesterday to the voters of Mari province, where he went and gave an address and went through a Q&A, he hits the usual high notes of speeches of his father to diversify the economy, to support the oil and gas industry, to promote production of electrical power, which of course is one of Turkmenistan's exports, to promote employment, to promote agriculture and agribusiness, and to promote transportation and communications. And since he was in Mari, he referred specifically to the new tollway that is being built that will eventually connect Ashgabat to Turkmenabad, going through Mari. So The other thing I think is significant is that his father has decided he's going to stay on as chairman of the People's Council, the Halk Maslahati. So he will be there as a perhaps calming and steadying influence to make sure there are no abrupt changes in policy. And I'll stop right there.
Okay, thanks a lot. Sorry for this connection and some gaps. Just one short notice on the other candidates. I tried to just find out about the mentioning of the other candidate. If they appeared somehow, somewhere, they appeared in such kind of like congratulations to the president. There's a whole list of people who congratulate to the president for the birthday or this kind of events. No other mentioning in the Turkmen press about the candidates we talk. And plus, time to time, they appeared like this person was named as or was appointed to that point to that position or not. That's all what we have about the candidates, other candidates. So it shows us the character of the classical character of the events or the elections we had in Turkmenistan and we'll have in Turkmenistan. However, I'm very happy that not just like Western scholars and diplomats appearing on the stage, and we have also Aynabat Yaylymova from Turkmenistan. So I'm very happy that she represents their homeland and not speaking about just us observing the issues from abroad and from outside. As I said, she's a citizen of Turkmenistan and worked in a civil society organizations, both in Turkmenistan and United States. She's a founder, as you can see from her acronym, she's a founder of, director of Saglyk and Progress Foundation, and they're trying to improve public health literacy in Turkmenistan. She has been working on that place for the last 11 years. And of course, the same, including the information on COVID in the Turkmen language. So I'm really happy to have you here, and I'm very happy to looking forward to your words about your homeland. So just, Aynabat, the stage is yours, and you have also 10 minutes.
Thank you, Slavomir, and Sebastien for inviting me. Can you hear me? Just to want to make sure. Yes, okay. Please stop me if the connection is not working. So Serdar Berdymukhamedow will in all likelihood become the president of Turkmenistan on March 12th. So as of now, he has not stated any policy agenda. We had hopes of reform when his father started his presidency back in 2007. For the first 3 or 4 years of his presidency, we could access a bit less restricted internet. We could use Western Union to make unrestricted payments and openly exchange currency. And there was no black market for currency exchanges between 2008 and 16 in Turkmenistan. There were also fewer, less infrastructure projects, and people could come and leave the country with a bit less fear. Today, there's a glimmer of hope that resembles that hope back in 2007. It is a hope that Serdar Berdymukhamedow will improve the lives of Turkmen people, even just a little bit. We see these elections as a tool for government, for Turkmen government to project legitimacy. There is no government accountability, and therefore there is little hope for substantive improvement in Turkmenistan's poor governance. Last week at Progress, we published an article where we explain why meaningful public participation is not possible in these elections. We identify 6 major reasons. Specifically, I'm going to just briefly mention them. We talk about the lack of transparent election process. We talk about the total censorship of the media in Turkmenistan and lack of solution-based and nuanced reporting on issues that matter to average Turkmen in Turkmenistan in international media. We talk about the civic culture of paralyzing fear and learned helplessness in Turkmenistan. We also talk about disengaged and complicit international community and note and highlight weak low-capacity citizen groups' work, combined with disorganized and remote political opposition plagued with infighting. So let's take COVID as a case study. I think COVID is an indicative case study of the deeper systemic problems of the Turkmen government. Since the start of the pandemic, our organization, Saglyk, has been one of the few voices of science-based COVID information in Turkmen. As of today, the government still maintains that there are 0 COVID infections and deaths in the country. In the beginning of the pandemic, we started reaching out to the Ministry of Health, trying to provide data, suggestions, and offering our assistance. And when we were met with silence, we decided to provide regularly science-based COVID information in Turkmen language to Turkmen public. We emailed our letters to the Ministry of Health. The email doesn't work. Our letters bounced back. We posted our letters on our website and social media. When I called the Ministry of Health trying to find the working email, I was transferred to 9 different departments, and the 10th person told me this: I cannot give you the ministry's email. We are monitored by security officers, by security services. Who knows what you're going to write about? At times, we also found ourselves countering President's advice to use Uzerlik, a traditional Turkmen herb to prevent COVID. Over the course of a deeply mismanaged pandemic, we found ourselves increasingly playing the role of watchdog organization of international institutions such as WHO, USAID, and the World Bank, who all have enabled the Turkmen government to mislead its people. One example, WHO came to Turkmenistan to test for COVID early in 2020, and they were shuffled to specific government hospitals, where not surprisingly, they found no COVID. WHO then issued a statement saying, we did not find COVID, but you should act as if there is COVID. Worse, Turkmen government ran COVID public health messaging campaigns telling people to wash their hands and wear masks to avoid toxic dust from the RLC that causes respiratory distress. These messages were funded by USAID and supported by UNICEF. Of the text messages that the government sent out, none mentioned the virus by its name, COVID, confusing the people further. But worse still, the government closed the country, making it nearly impossible to enter or leave the country, disrupting the economy, education abroad, passport renewal, and visits home. I, for example, could not visit my dad who died last summer, a great sorrow that many others had to suffer as well. The government's mismanagement of COVID has taken physical, emotional, and economic toll on people in Turkmenistan. The mishandling of this crisis, which continues, is indicative of a deeper governance failure in Turkmenistan. I hesitate to believe that this non-democratic transfer of power to President's son is going to fix this, especially as Serdar Berdymukhamedow has not stated any policy plan up to this point. All these restrictions profoundly impact the economy in Turkmenistan. Our PALO index tracks inflation by using the most popular dish in Turkmenistan, PALO. Our data show that annual inflation rate in Turkmenistan was over 40% in 2021. The inflation rate started to decline in September, with inflation reaching 20% in February 2022. The market value of the currency manat is 6 times lower than the official rate. Small businesses have been ordered to close. This left people unemployed during the height of the pandemic. Small businesses have not received any government support. All of what I described is deeply troubling and demoralizing for the public in Turkmenistan. We published short-term goals for the first 100 days of Serdar Berdymukhamedow's presidency. I invite you all to read them and make them part of your engagement with the Turkmen government, and use them as benchmarks and preconditions for any engagement. The first 100 days will be crucial for Serdar Berdymukhamedow to gain support and trust of Turkmen public, to start addressing unprecedented socioeconomic hardships in Turkmenistan. In a 4-page long document, the first thing that we're asking Serdar Berdymukhamedow is to admit that the pandemic has claimed Turkmen lives and has taken an emotional, physical, and economic toll on population. This should be his very first action. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. But actually, your Saglyk org website also serves me as a very interesting source of information, although mostly in Turkmen, for the information on how COVID is spread around Turkmenistan and how to deal with that. So thank you for that great job in this sphere. And finally, last speaker, or maybe last but not least, Sebastien Peyrouse, the well-known research professor at Central Asian Program at the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies in George Washington University. Well, his main areas of expertise are like political systems in Central Asia, economic, social issues, Islam, religious minorities, Central Asian geopolitical positioning toward China, India, South Asia. Actually, to make the story short, everywhere I can see some expertise in Central Asia. I can see Sebastien so for many years. So that's also he has very wide range of publications on different topics. But one of them is I think crucial for this discussion and. Part of many other books and articles on Central Asia, his Turkmenistan strategies of power, dilemmas, and of development. I think that most of us that are somehow familiar and deal with the Turkmenistan, most of us have this book on the very honorable place in our libraries. So, Sebastien, the stage is yours, and it's usually 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Slavomir. Well, so I mean, it's never easy to speak after 3 great speeches, and much has already been said. But I think I'm going to follow up a little bit with what Aynabat said by focusing maybe more on the situation of people's daily life and on the civil society and on some also some economic points, and to elaborate a little bit on what these new elections mean or actually do not mean. So yes, I mean, as it has been said, it is highly unlikely that Serdar, considering his background, will bring significant political, economic, or social changes. These elections and actually Serdar coming to power, I think, are in a way likely to repeat history, meaning that what we saw in 2006 when Yazov died and Berdymukhamedow came to power, which actually had raised hopes for change. And what we saw, on the contrary, we saw some ongoing restrictions on freedom of expression and an ongoing or even increased control and repression of the population, particularly, I should say, maybe in these last 3 years as the economic and social crisis has worsened in the country. And I will go further back, saying that while Berdymukhamedow has not modernized his economy, which remains, for example, insufficiently diversified, and I'll come back to this. On the other hand, he has modernized his authoritarianism by adapting it to the new context of new media, by using modern tools to control internet, mobile phones, social networks, etc. I mean, Turkmenistan has purchased specialized equipment and software from abroad to enable the government to check private computers, telephone equipment. So political authorities also increased their efforts to prevent people's access to non-authorized websites by restricting significantly the access to VPNs. Also, by the way, no Turkmenistani official law prohibits their use. The government also has attacked the free media beyond the borders of Turkmenistan. You had more and more cyber attacks carried out against the opposition sites which are based abroad. And all of that so takes place in an overall repression of any opposition. I mean, any person whose criticism is reported and may be targeted. And here again, this has been accentuated in recent years with, on the one hand, the government's effort to repress opponents were based abroad, as we have seen in particular in the case of Turkmeni activists in Turkey, but also by an increasing repression of their families who remained in Turkmenistan. So, but now, I mean, a next question, however, is that despite this high level of authoritarianism, which is likely to be maintained, Serdar will need to have maybe a minimal, very minimal legitimacy. I mean, it would probably be necessary for him to bring some, how to say, some specific traits to stamp his own logo, if I may say, on his presidency in order to sustain the regime security, and especially in a time of crisis. So the question is, to what extent is Serdar Berdymukhamedow more aware of the problems that the country is facing, or to what extent will he be willing to take them into account, at least more than his father did? Well, for years, or I should say for decades, the government has released, I mean, a flow of forged and unreliable economic data, which were supposed to demonstrate the high performance of the country's economy that eventually the IMF and or the World Bank even questioned and refused at some point to take into account. And despite these figures, I mean, Turkmenistan economy has continued to face major problems due to, among many reasons, the lack of diversification of its economy, concentration on gas exploitation, and due to also to unforeseen developments such as a severe summer drought, which severely impacted the agricultural sector. So is Serdar going to change that? Let me take a concrete example among the issues that the country is facing, which is food security or food insecurity, which is really one of the main threats, which could be one of the main threats to the regime security, and which has remained unaddressed despite government's efforts to claim otherwise. I mean, this last 2 or 3 years, especially, we've seen the sale of food in state stores has been severely rationed, with some essential foodstuffs missing from stores, particularly, but not only in the provinces. And this is forcing the population to buy in private stores at higher prices, at much higher prices, which are inaccessible for many people with low or average income. So is that going to change with Serdar? Well, actually, as we have seen this last year, Serdar Berdymukhamedow visited several regions to check food availability and prices in local markets, totally, of course, endorsing the propaganda, arguing, and here I quote him, that the markets provide a year-round abundance of products at affordable prices, and that not imported, but domestic good prevails on the shelves. So, I mean, he insisted on the need also to improve the system of distribution of domestic products and to increase the volume of exported goods. Also, I mean, it did not specify at all which steps would be taken to reach these goals. And in any case, all of that very significantly contrast with the ongoing difficult food situation within the country. I mean, I'll also remind here that Serdar Berdymukhamedow banned people from queuing up outside grocery stores just because it could damage the country's image and the slogan of the alleged epoch of might and happiness in Turkmenistan. So, I mean, why am I saying that? To explain that, actually, in many sectors, in civil society or in economy, including in very sensitive sectors like food security, things are unlikely to evolve, very unlikely to evolve, to change significantly. I hope I'm wrong, but I remain very skeptical, not to say pessimistic. But still, I mean, I raise the question again, will Berdymukhamedow need to take some initiatives that, as Aynabat says, people are waiting for? I mean, in order to showcase that is addressing some of the biggest issues and that could ultimately pose a threat to the regime. For example, by maybe opening up the country's economy a little bit more to foreign investors in sectors that so far have received a little investments, but which could contribute to the diversification of the economy. Well, I mean, Gurbangully Berdymukhamedow was doing that, but with very limited success for multiple reasons, including the country's tainted political reputations, corruption, some very difficult investment conditions. So this would need some changes to make the country a little bit more attractive. But maybe more openness could allow foreign companies to engage in various sectors and contribute to the diversification of Turkmenistan economy. An increased presence of US or other foreign countries' companies could also maybe bring some more, let's say, social corporate engagement. For example, vocational training could be particularly useful given the very poor education system of Turkmenistan right now. So, I mean, just to conclude, the question is, will that be easy? No, the answer is definitely no. I mean, it may sound even a little bit like, how to say, a message in a bottle thrown into the sea, because without significant reform of the authoritarian nature of the government, foreign countries' room for maneuver and the impact of international engagement is likely to remain very modest. And also for foreign countries, it also means not falling into the trap of having investments and engagement misused by the kleptocratic system of corruption, which has been created by the two first presidents, so Aynabat and Berdymukhamedow, to the benefits of their families and other elites. So, yes, I repeat, I mean, this is of course not going to be easy, but at a time where political changes intersect with economic and social crises, and considering the very difficult situation of Turkmeni people, any opportunity, even small ones, should be exploited or at least explored. I really think that, I mean, the people of Turkmenistan really deserve that. And I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastien, for your overview, or let's say, basically potential perspectives of Turkmenistan after the elections. Actually, me personally, I'm relatively quite skeptical about any changes. Of course, we don't know, as Aynabat says, we absolutely don't know about some real program. We don't have any signs of real program of Serdar Berdymukhamedow, apart of some very general issues. However, as we can see in many other cases of authoritarian regimes or dictatorships, the ruling family is lives in such its own shell, its own world, that they even don't mention in many cases the problems of the Turkmen economy and things like that. So I tend to be very skeptical about any significant changes, but probably maybe Serdar could somehow surprise us, but as he will probably be under very strong supervising of his father and the family, his space for maneuvering and for some changes eventually, even if he would like to have some, it would be of course quite difficult. I would like to have to give the floor also to our questions. Well, we have a couple of questions. I will merge them together on Trans-Caspian pipeline and connections with Afghanistan. So if somebody of speakers can raise up this question. So what's the situation, or how do you expect the Afghan direction of Turkmen foreign policy, and what about the eventual fate of Trans-Caspian pipeline, I mean, and into Western direction?
Well, I can maybe address that. The two questions there on the Trans-Caspian pipeline. If you had asked me that question 2 weeks ago, I would have said that the large 30 billion cubic meter per year pipeline that President Berdymukhamedow has advocated for quite some time that it was not going to happen because of the shift in the European Union towards renewables. I think events since the Russian invasion of Ukraine have changed the dynamic. So it may not be completely dead at this point. We don't know yet exactly where the Europeans are going to take their energy policy. But if you look at what the European Union's Commissioner for Energy had to say just about 2 weeks ago, even before the Russians went into Ukraine, she said natural gas needs to be part of the picture because we cannot make the transition to renewables quickly enough to substitute for natural gas. And if we're going to see a cutback in the availability of Russian gas, which is a very distinct possibility, they're going to have to find it from someplace else. So a Trans-Caspian pipeline could conceivably be back on the table as a possibility in the not too distant future. And what was the second question?
The second question was on Afghan direction. I mean, Afghan connections to Afghanistan.
Talking about the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. Turkmenistan has been seeking financing for that for years now and has not been able to come up with a financing package. As a result, there has not been a lot of progress on it. And now that the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan, I simply do not see that any investors will be willing to take the political risk of investing several $1 billion in a natural gas pipeline to go across Afghanistan and then across Pakistan. The fact that the Indians have not yet committed to a contract for the gas is quite indicative too of the Indian reluctance. So I don't see TAPI going forward anytime soon, if ever.
If I might jump in here, not so much to talk about pipelines and the energy, but in terms of outreach at this moment to Turkmenistan. And it's absolutely the case. I mean, Olaf Scholz, the German prime minister, was very emphatic about saying they need to look at their whole energy policy from the foundation. On the other hand, the fact that Nord Stream 2 is dead does not mean necessarily that there's not other ways to get gas to Europe. That was, I think, primarily a political thing so that they could bypass Ukraine. That said, I think one of the reasons that these pipelines, the Trans-Caspian never got off the ground was for political reasons. I mean, as well as the economic, lack of understanding of markets on the part of the Turkmen government is, fear. I mean, they're sandwiched between, Russia, Iran. They have a monopolistic arrangement with China. And so clearly, I think, the Russian concern was always very much out there, and it will be more than ever. So if I could just sort of put in a pitch, and that is, we will have a succession. Presumably it will be Serdar. And I'm not saying we're there to build him up as a person, but he is will be presumably the new head of the Turkmen government. I'm a diplomat, so I believe in engagement. And that is because I think we can, and I think oftentimes it's best done privately when we advocate for things like human rights for education, which we do. But I think that Russia will be on Turkmenistan's back more than ever. So I think having a new president in would be a great time for the United States to reach out, to establish a dialogue with him directly. I've never heard him speak English, but I understand he does. Of course, I understand all the skepticism about real reforms there, but you do have a new opening. Of course, he's going to have his dad looking over his shoulder as the chair of the Halk Maslahati, but with time, I mean, he may want to start, having some of his own projects. I hope it'll be things that benefit the long-suffering Turkmen people, access to education, to food, to decent health services. I mean, Saglyk, Aynabat's story is just, tragic and all too common, I think. But one thing might be that given his own increased, much greater exposure to the outside world, maybe he will want to do something, to sort of start being the face of Turkmenistan abroad. Maybe he will have more trips abroad, but whether he does or not, we have an embassy, we have people to visit. And yes, we may not get our aid programs always right, but unfortunately, they're really pretty tiny where it comes to Turkmenistan. And I think we have tried to put them, into programs that will benefit the Turkmen people. But as always, execution, as Aynabat and has illustrated, is very difficult. But I do hope that we take the opportunity to reach out at a particularly difficult time for the Central Asians. Just that vote in the UNGA on Ukraine, where all the Turkmen abstained, except for Uzbekistan and Turkmen that weren't present for the vote, clearly they were lobbied like hell. You could just see the record of calls and meetings from Moscow to them. So let's give Turkmenistan, some access to non-Russia and Chinese influence, whether it's pipelines, whether it's education, health, and so on. So forgive me for that long-winded commercial, but I am a diplomat, and I do believe in engagement, and I think it can make a difference. Thank you for my rant.
If I could just fill in a couple of gaps. Serdar does indeed speak English. I've heard him speak English, so he can carry on his end of a conversation. And I've talked to some businessmen who have conversed with him about business affairs. They tell me that not only is his English adequate to carry on a normal conversation, but he actually grasps some economic concepts like cost of production and profit margins and things like that his predecessors, Niyazov and his father, simply do not comprehend because they came up through the Soviet system. So there is a glimmer of hope that he will understand how business is conducted better than his predecessors. And as we say, hope springs eternal.
If I may add, or maybe later, Slavomir, is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, just on what was said by Ambassador Kennedy and Mustard, I just wanted to kind of continue that line of thought, just contribute based on some points based on our observation. So Serdar Berdymukhamedow doesn't have to do it by himself. I just want to remind that there are a lot of young people who've been educated inside and outside the country of his age and younger, who are capable to deal with economic and socioeconomic hardships. The expectation is that he should show the leadership of getting this new generation of thinkers. And I'm not talking about political system, I'm talking in terms of socioeconomic issues in the country. So that's one thing. And Ambassador Kennedy put it very well, that she's a diplomat and she stands for engagement. We stand for engagement, for dialogue, constructive engagement, and informed discussion too. But it's very, very important for the United States and Russia and others in the region and China, especially for the United States, because we have two ambassadors right now on the panel, to communicate the values openly and the results of the discussions. Right now, there's consultations happening between the government of Turkmenistan and United States. And we as citizens only hear one version of those meetings, very brief with no specific points. It's very important to hear what happened in the meeting. I'm not naive saying that it should be the whole record of the meeting should be posted somewhere, but exactly what was brought up and what were the issues discussed. So that's very important. And the last point is that there's this misconception about Turkmenistan that only government policies, government's action or inaction deserves attention. And people of Turkmenistan is shown with no agency to act and think. And it's as if people is just monolith mass of people just wanting the same things. It's a very, very diverse group of people. We want very different things. That doesn't mean that we cannot resolve them diplomatically, constructively, sitting at the table. I'm just saying that it's very, very important to approach the public not as just one group of people wanting the same thing at the same time. So in communicating our aspirations, because the international media always focuses on problems, which is very much needed. It should be there, but Turkmens should start also think about their aspirations, what kind of country they want to live in. These are very uncomfortable discussions, but they should start happening. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe I can move again to the foreign policy of Turkmenistan. Well, there is a question following up our Trans-Caspian Afghanistan issues. I have another question on another foreign policy direction, and it's Central Asia. How do you see, how the panelists see the eventual possibilities for regional integration with the new expected president, or could we come again to this rather autarkic behavior of foreign Turkish policy or isolationist policy of Turkmenistan? I mean, it means the regular consultations with other leaders of Central Asia that are unofficially held every year, relations with the neighbors, especially Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, pipelines, and a host of other issues. If anybody can raise the question, the issue.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. We really saw a breakthrough, I think it was around 2017 at the UN General Assembly, when for the first time since independence, the foreign ministers of the 5 Central Asian countries sat down informally and had dinner in New York. And this was a direct outgrowth of the C5+1 format that the US government had been promoting to get them together with the US Secretary of State. And since then, we've seen a couple of phenomena. One of them is that the Japanese and the Koreans and the Chinese have jumped in on this now, creating their own C5+1 formats, although they tend to be more commercially oriented. And we've also seen that the foreign ministers, as well as the presidents of the countries, have been willing to get together and talk about economic, not so much integration as economic cooperation. Integration is a term that seems to have a really bad connotation to it because it harkens back to the Soviet period. So they'd want to talk more about economic cooperation and collaboration rather than integration. But it's moving in a positive direction. And I suspect that what Russia is doing to Ukraine right now is going to give that a bit of an impetus. I'll turn it over to the rest of you now.
Yeah, I mean, if Slavomir, may I follow up a little bit on that? I mean, very quickly, I don't want to take too much time. We're getting to the end of the event, but yes, I mean, it's very, for the government, I mean, for Serdar Berdymukhamedow, I think this very difficult, as I said in my presentation, social and economic context. I mean, he will really need, I guess, to develop relations with other countries surrounding Turkmenistan, but also beyond. I mean, it's going to be very difficult to go on in a kind of isolationist policy. So I'm aware, of course, that Turkmenistan has its neutral status, which is a pillar, main dimension of its foreign policy. But there is, for example, a question from the audience asking if Turkmenistan could join a kind of Central Asian Union. Well, it's of course very difficult to say, but as Allan said, we have seen an evolution of Turkmenistan being a little bit more open to foreign relations. So And we, by the way, Turkmenistan has applied to be a member of the World Trade Organization now, which is a big step for a country which has been isolated in the name of its neutral status for many years. So I don't know. I mean, it's speculation. I don't know if Turkmenistan is ready to join any kind of union like a Central Asian Union or whatever. But I do believe that Serdar Berdymukhamedow would try at least to develop more relations with foreign countries, which bring us back to one of the essential points is that, in a way, what Laura was saying, it gives us maybe some opportunities to interact a little bit more with the regime, despite its authoritarianism.
If I might, yeah. I mean, there was a certain logic, I think, to Niyazov's embrace of this positive neutrality, because I mean, it was a way of giving him an excuse to stay out of the orbit of Russia, for example. So in some ways, as I say, there was real method to that. But the downside, of course, was they were so closed off. I think the ground is certainly more fruitful for regional integration. I think the accession of President Mirziyoyev in Uzbekistan really, introduced a big change there. I remember how Karimov and Niyazov hated each other. I remember, the relations with Gaidar Aliyev were poisonous. I remember the famous Caspian summit where he was openly insulting him. So there's really been a better dynamic there. But Sebastien, again, great point about the World Trade Organization. They need to be engaged with all of these institutions that Tom Simons, I just see, is here from the very beginning, was central to our our whole post-Soviet policy was to integrate them, give them an opportunity to develop their own links with the outside world. I mean, and I loved Aynabat's point about, the Turkmen people need to have agency. And that's what we really tried to do, was to open these opportunities so they would not be just, sort of bottled up at home. Again, going back to Serdar in his years in Geneva, the home of the WTO. So, and he certainly will have had exposure to that institution. So let's just hope that a greater opening to the outside world may be part of his new administration. And again, I just hope that the U.S. government will take advantage of a new president to reach out. And going back again to Aynabat's point, I so get you about the Turkmen people, and so. For example, when I was in Turkmenistan, I always tried to frame my remarks, pitching them to the people of Turkmenistan, not the government. And we always tried to reach out to the individual groups that make up the tapestry of Turkmenistan. Civil society, as you know, is very tough in Turkmenistan, but that's, I think, what the US government can really help on. And in terms of reports, all I can say is when the foreign minister Muradov was just in town and held the annual consultations, the Department of State did put out its own report, in which, of course, they did note various topics that were covered, including education, health, human rights, and so on. But yes, it would be nice to hear more from the Turkmen side. But anyhow, we do try.
Thanks a lot.
Pavamir,
yeah.
do we have just one second? Not 1 second, 1 minute. So it's just, I think it's very important. Sebastien mentioned the WTO, and there are other organizations. We are closely following what they're doing in Turkmenistan. So by that, what I mean is that it's very, very important, and it should be the very first step, release of data that concerns development, human development in Turkmenistan. The data collection should be emphasized, not emphasized, as put as precondition for any engagement with government, because absence of data means that we are operating government data. Absence of government data means that we're operating in the environment of misinformation, disinformation, and rumors. And that really impacts the human development in Turkmenistan. And so it's very important, just knowing that World Bank, for example, and IMF stopped release, including Turkmen government data into the report. Serdar can change that within 100 days, releasing their version, the government's version's data. And it's not, I'm not saying it's easy to do it, but the government has data. Please release it, and international communities should be focusing on that, because that doesn't take that much effort. Thank you.
I'm not sure if we can hear you, Aynabat, now. Sorry, maybe it's the internet connection on my side. Actually, just to add one or two sentences more concerning the regional cooperation, we can see somehow more opening of Turkmenistan towards Central Asian cooperation in last years. Even Serdar Berdymukhamedow participated in several rather informal meetings of Central Asian leaders without any other powers. We have the ambassador started to talk about 5+1 formats in terms of the US, China, Korea, or so. However, we can't miss also some kind of intra-Central Asian increasing cooperation among the states themselves. Of course, now we can question, very good question on WTO. Of course, I will not touch it anymore. And plus, one more question is, what about Russia? Because we could see in January that Russian presence in Central Asia and Russian pressure on Central Asia also increased to some extent. Of course, it might change with this all now operations in the Ukraine. So the attention of Russian leadership is turned to the Ukraine. But in case Russia will somehow lose the Ukraine, Central Asia don't remember that Central Asia will be basically the last point. The last place of Russian influence, big area influence in the world. So probably we should also mention that point. Well, concerning the other question, there are two questions that are also somehow can be merged together. What about the reaction of international community with the helping of Turkmen citizens and especially students stuck abroad without passports or with outdated passports when Turkmen embassies, they don't issue the new passport, they don't replace the passport, even prolong, although we have seen some changes at least in Turkey, but in other cases we can't see it very much. For Turkmens studying, especially now, one question deals with Ukraine, that now there is a flow of outflow of Turkmen students from the Ukraine. And the second question is on the US approach, how US diplomacy will deal with this issue inside the United States. Probably, if you allow me, I can raise up this question as representative of the EU country, the question on the EU. Right now, we can see that Poland, Slovakia, at least Romania, they basically open the borders to all citizens escaping from Ukraine. So including Turkmen ones. Me personally, now I'm engaged with my friends here in Prague and somehow trying to figure out the people escaping from Turkmenistan, from the Ukraine with the Turkmen passports, and they are allowed to cross the border. So that's a very good sign. Of course, the next fate or the followed fate is under the question as the fate of all Ukrainian refugees right now. But nevertheless, at least they could leave the country. Some of them they can move to another European country. Some of them they are moving to Turkey in search of any help from their community. So just one short, quick remark from the European Union and from, let's say, Central Europe. Maybe you can answer the question on the US policy in this issue.
I'll take a stab at it, but I don't think that there is a really solid answer yet. And I should point out that the issue of extending visas or extending stays of foreign nationals in the United States is not really the province of diplomats of the Department of State. That's more Homeland Security. And my only advice to someone who is stuck in this position is to find yourself an immigration lawyer and have an immigration lawyer go to Homeland Security and see what can be done to extend your stay legally. This is a problem. It's not as big a problem in the United States as it is in Europe, because we only have between 200 and 400 Turkmen students in the United States at any given time. So it's not a huge problem, and DHS should be able to figure out some way of dealing with it. Whereas if you look at Europe, there are literally thousands of Turkmen students scattered across the European continent.
Slavomir, if I may add on these issues. So there are three major crises, urgent crises that are happening right now for Turkmens stuck outside of the country. It's very important to understand that the international travel stopped in March 2020. This means that we cannot enter, and with a lot of difficulties only can leave the country, but it's not clear what's the procedure, what the rules are. It's very arbitrary. So the issue of passports, extension of it, we're asking that embassies start processing the passports, making new passports, extending them here at the embassies. My own passport expired. I just got an extension for until the end of December. So they're opening the borders, which impacting, let's say, if you're healthy, forget about it, you can leave in Turkmenistan. Let's say that, right? It's not acceptable, of course, but there are a lot of people who are sick and cannot travel for medical tourism. And it's been like this since 2020. So we don't know how many people died due to COVID, to this specific COVID restriction. And then this ongoing right now, the Turkmen students stuck in Ukraine and not be able to, get support. There are lots of rumors, there is misinformation, there is disinformation. We can talk about it all day long. But the very important thing is that there's this feeling that the government is not hearing, the embassies are not hearing the public. So I think the first step would be for Serdar Berdymukhamedow to start with this very small, not very small, but very significant, meaningful, approach to these problems by showing that there's a hearing government in Turkmenistan. So addressing, when I go somewhere, I should get a response, not just embassy, any ministry, any public office, and it should be recorded, and I should be treated as a citizen of Turkmenistan. This is possible, this can be done, but these are the very first things that he can show that the public service can, services can address these issues.
Okay, thanks a lot, Aynabat. I'm really sorry that we were not able to answer all questions that came up in the chat, but unfortunately, we are running out of time, and we should finish this discussion. Thank you very much to all participants, to all those who send the questions to us, and of course, my great thanks for the participants and the speakers and to share their ideas and their visions of Turkmenistan. Let's hope that the new president will somehow improve the situation inside the country and with the foreign policy of the country or connection of the country with the other world. So thank you very much for all participate and see you with another discussions organized by George Washington University. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.